everybody. And that pause in the background was while we set up to bring in our next guest for this afternoon, Dinah Everett Snyder. Her website is DinahEverettSnyder.org. Dinah Everett Snyder, by the way, is all one word. Just jam it together. No spaces, no underlines, no nothing. Dinah, D-I-N-A-H, Everett, EverettSnyder.org. And Dinah, at this point, it's all yours. Please take it away.
Thank you, Gary. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the United We Strike Marathon. Lots has been happening in the month since we last were here on broadcast, and you've been listening to these fantastic guests all morning. So I'm actually just going to jump around with several different topics. Of course, one of the highlights in the news right now is Nelson Mandela's death and funeral in South Africa. And lots of rumors swirling around about perhaps he died in June, and they've been keeping him on ice and rolling him out for a funeral in December. There's some very interesting things about that because, of course, Nelson Mandela was very ill for a long time. He spent a long time in the hospital, and people seem to have forgotten that there was this little incident where his ambulance broke down and was broken down for 40 minutes before he was taken to a hospital. And on June 6th or June 7th, the date is a little murky, he was declared brain dead and in a vegetative state. The family was called, Bishop Desmond Tutu arrived, and not many statements were issued after that. All of a sudden, there was news that he was back home, while simultaneously in the news, there was a lot of information about various lawsuits against the Nelson Mandela Children's Foundation because of its association with his personal finances. The rumor mills about various family members suing the estate. And then all of a sudden we had his death announced, and we have 91 leaders from around the world descending on South Africa for a funeral. I think that everybody needs to calm down. We have a lot of rumors, a lot of conspiracy theories. In this particular case, it would be safe to say that Nelson Mandela has been alive all this time, barely kept alive on machines, and we should instead be focusing on why exactly 91 leaders from around the world have descended on South Africa for a funeral. Because, after all, he might have been the president that ushered in the so-called democracy in South Africa. He might have had a very colorful background in the fight against apartheid. But ultimately, Nelson Mandela is not the wonderful, grandfatherly, kind gentleman that he has been portrayed so recently in the media. Nelson Mandela is a terrorist, and he is the head of a terrorist organization called the ANC, which is currently the government in South Africa. You know, by 1994, the average life expectancy of the black South Africans had reached 64 years of age, but now it's fallen below 50. Average statistical numbers of 49 include data on white and Asian populations of the country, of which the life expectancy is much higher. If we take apart the black population, its life expectancy is less than 47 years. South Africa has also come out on top in the world population with regard to infections, and particularly AIDS. It's the world's leader in rape. There is a rape every 30 seconds in South Africa. Post-apartheid South Africa also firmly holds first place for killing and looting. It set the world record for a lengthy trial. In 2002, the South African security forces arrested 23 Afrikaners on suspicion of conspiracy to overthrow the government, as well as in the preparation of acts of sabotage. The trial is known as Boeramag, which is the name of the group, which translates from Afrikaans, it means power drills or Boer power. 20 people are behind bars pending a trial. The world doesn't want to hear about violence in South Africa. They want to believe that apartheid is over and the new regime is truly a rainbow nation, where nothing could be further from the truth. There is an ongoing issue there called one settler, one bullet. In no country can you have a democracy, or can you truly talk about freedom of the people, when the current president, the prior president, the ANC youth leader, and all the government officials are on record and on video singing songs about bring me my machine gun, bring me my machete, one farmer, one bullet. It is a travesty that the world has turned its back on the truth of what is going on in South Africa. I want to talk briefly about the South African farm attacks. South African statutory law does not define a farm attack as a specific crime. Rather, the term is used to refer to a number of different crimes committed against persons, specifically on commercial farms or small holdings. According to the South African Police Service National Operations Coordinating Committee, I know that was a huge mouthful, attacks on farms and small holdings refer to acts aimed at the person of residents, workers, and visitors to farms and small holdings, whether with the intent to murder, rape, rob, or inflict bodily harm. In addition, all actions aimed at disrupting farming activities, such as commercial concerns, whether for motives related to ideology, labor disputes, land issues, revenge, grievances, anti-white concerns, or intimidation, should be included. This definition excludes the social fabric crimes, that those crimes committed by members of the farming community on one another, such as domestic or workplace violence, and focus on outsiders entering the farms to commit specific criminal acts. As of December 2011, approximately 3,811 white farmers have been murdered in these farm attacks in South Africa. The South African government has been criticized both for doing too little to prevent farm attacks and for giving the issue a disproportionate amount of attention. Always, of course, the wrong attention. Human Rights Watch has criticized the government for placing too much emphasis on protecting farmers at the expense of protecting farm workers. They suggest that farm attacks are given a disproportionately high media and political focus. In 2004, the South African journalist Yanni Allen appeared on the radio show in America here with Jeff Rents. She denounced the attacks and accused the South African government of a genocidal campaign. This goes back, I'm originally from South Africa. I left there in 1986, and I witnessed several incidences of necklacing. And that is, of course, where they take a tire, which they place over a person, trapping your arms inside of your body, pouring gasoline over you, and lighting a match. Some people have survived this horrific act of violence. Mercifully, most of them die. And, I really believe in the following statement, and that's this. If the measure of a nation is in its accountability to its citizens and its protection of its vulnerable groups, then when you look at the governments of these places, you can estimate where their values are. South Africa, like America, has lost its way. We need to focus more attention on South Africa. The international community needs to be talking about these South African farm attacks. We need to be talking about this one settler, one bullet. We need to be talking about the disproportionate amount of violence that is going on in this country that we have supposedly freed from apartheid. It's no coincidence that the Queen heads the Knights of Malta and that Nelson Mandela's commemorative stamp shows him in a gown of the Knights of Malta. So I ask everyone to think about this. If the Queen is the head of the Church of England and the Knights of Malta answers to the Vatican, why do we have pictures of the Queen in the Knights of Malta regalia? Why does the Queen knight those that are included into the Malta stratosphere? And why is Nelson Mandela being recognized so effusively around the world as a great political leader, when in fact the years that he spent in prison were not for something related to apartheid and trying to free his people from oppression, but the reason that he was in jail was because of acts of terrorism. So on that note, I want to come over back to America briefly and talk about something that touches on everyone, but it's particularly important for Americans, although they don't necessarily know this. And this is this issue of the Trans-Pacific Pact. This is NAFTA on steroids. It's a free trade zone from Vietnam to Chile. It's going to touch the lives of more than 800 million people. It's going to affect 40% of the global economy and a third of all trade. The people involved represent Halliburton, Monsanto, bankers, the World Bank, International Monetary Fund. Our president, President Obama, has made it his policy, his hallmark, to not include members of Congress. You have to know how bad something is, how insidious it is, when you have our corrupt Congress people complaining that they have been excluded from any trade negotiations concerning the Trans-Pacific Pact. It's not a trade document. It's a corporate mandate. It's a corporate takeover with the full might of vested private for-profit corporations and their own personal enforcement personnel. They have written this, and I don't know. I mean, I talk to people in America, and they really don't seem to know very much. They've heard of it vaguely. People have no idea what this is. There have been several leaks, but the U.S. Congress and the U.S. President and his departments, the U.S. Army, the U.S. Navy, the U.S. Air Force, they have all been financed by our personal printer, the Federal Reserve, paid for with money that is now beholden to every single American man, woman, and child. And now we have a trade agreement that has 29 chapters, wherein only 5 have to do with trade. The other 24 either handcuff domestic government, limiting food safety and environmental standards and financial regulations. It dictates strange amendments to energy and climate policy, or it establishes new powers for corporations. These are the same invested privileges that promote job offshoring to foreign countries for lower wages. There's a ban on buy local procurements.
And I think Dinah has slipped off into Never Never Land. That happens with Dinah's Skype connection from time to time. You know, I keep telling her she's got to get some of those donuts with the pink sprinkles for the guys in the black Suburban parked out in front of her place, but oh well. Let's try a reconnect here and see if maybe we can pull her back in here kicking and screaming. I'm throwing a rope in her direction. Well, I tell you, she was just getting the good parts, too. And we're trying it again. Okay, it says she's busy. Let's try this. By the way, for those of you who do not recognize my voice, I am Gary Hendershot, your producer. I'm broadcasting to you live at about 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time from my secret underground bunker just 12 miles south of Washington, D.C. Trying to throw a line to Dinah Everett Snyder, see if I can get her back in here so she can. And we may have lost Dinah Everett Snyder. I tell you, that's one of the interesting things about live broadcasting is that quite often you have these little minor issues. Matt Navarro, I think I did manage to drag you in here kicking and screaming while I'm still attempting to get a hold of Dinah.
Hi, yeah, Gary. Thanks for producing today. I know it's not easy to produce, and things like losing Dinah is kind of a ongoing issue. We I don't know. We have these technical gremlins with sometimes, and Dinah has to.
I'm here.
Yeah,
I'm frozen. Like I can't do anything.
you've got to go take your computer in to get
wait a minute now.
virus scans.
We've got her now, and I tell you, she was just getting to the good parts, Matt. We were,
I'm just going to sit back here.
Yeah,
and
let's
let you
just
go, Dinah.
I think we lost her again.
Lost her again.
Doggone it! Anyway, I wanted to hear what she had.
Yeah.
Well, let's see, Matt. I wonder if we can pedal real fast here and save some whales and feed some hungry.
Well, let's we can continue to try to get her, but
Well, she's here now. I mean, we've got her right now. Well, okay. I'll tell you what. I'm going to kick back and shut my mouth and let Dinah finish her arguments, because she was putting some really good arguments on the table that I'd really like to hear her summation on. So I'm going to shut up.
Well, don't go too far, because I know when it's going to happen, this whole tech thing, because I keep the lights on in my office, and the lights don't flicker, but the computer starts to flicker, and that's when I know I'm about to go down. Yes, let me continue with this Trans-Pacific Pact, shall I? One of the most concerning things that everyone in the world should be concerned about, one particular thing in the Trans-Pacific Pact, and that is this issue of relating to internet freedoms. Through a back door of the Copyright Act, there is a move to control the international World Wide Web. Because through the Copyright Act, which they're trying to legitimize as a result of pirating and anti-piracy laws, they're seeking to put all these controls in place that are going to completely decimate and annihilate the World Wide Web. Now, for Americans, of course, we know there are specific politicians that have been agitating for years to control the web. At the top of that would be Senator John McCain, one of my least favorite people on the planet. But he really has to take a back seat in terms of the Trans-Pacific Pact, because of all of the really big names and the secret organizations that are seeking to control the World Wide Web, which is one of the reasons why I so strongly advocate for everybody to be online right now, because apparently the Trans-Pacific Pact is going to go into effect at 12:01 a.m. on the 1st of January 2014. There's no confirmation of this, but that is a rumor coming from very good sources that indicate that regardless of what you do and don't read in the newspapers, and regardless of what our president and other countries are or not confirming, that the Trans-Pacific Pact will indeed go into effect at 12:01 a.m. on January 1st, 2014. There are some other things, of course, that are very concerning about the Trans-Pacific Pact, and that will be that there will be enhanced freedoms to enter other countries and take natural resources. There will be specific rights granted for the mining of oil and gas and precious metals. Precious metals are very important to our technology industry. They're very, very important to the military-industrial complex, and we can look forward to perpetuation of wars, mythological reasons to go to war based on countries' resources that have to do with these precious minerals. All signatory countries will be required to change their domestic laws to meet enhanced mandates of the Trans-Pacific Pacts. So what that means is that countries are essentially going to give up their own personal sovereignty. The people in those countries, regardless of how they feel about genetically modified organisms and genetically modified foods and genetically modified ingredients in vaccinations, regardless of how they feel about vaccinations, by signing up to the Trans-Pacific Pact, you will, as an individual in a country, lose your voice in every sense of the word, because the mandates of the Trans-Pacific Pact are going to overrule and overwrite every domestic policy. And if you don't think that that's important, you're crazy. It's one of the most important and most insidious things about the whole Trans-Pacific Pact, regardless of any other language in there, is the language that clearly states that it supersedes all local governance. So essentially, we can pull out our hair and scream and shout and rant and rave on the street corner about the New World Order. But ladies and gentlemen, the Trans-Pacific Pact is the red carpet rollout to the New World Order of one government. The Trans-Pacific Pact is that one government that's going to be run via the United Nations on behalf of the Crown, the Vatican, and Washington, D.C., and it is extremely, extremely concerning. I want to read you something by Alexander Hamilton, and it says, "There is a certain enthusiasm in liberty that makes human nature rise above itself in acts of bravery and heroism. Well, now is the time to rise above ourselves and get active about this Trans-Pacific Pact. We need to get active about what is going on in South Africa. All this killing, all this murder." And Thomas Jefferson, who said, "I would rather be exposed to the inconveniences attending too much liberty than those attending too small a degree of it." And on that note, I want to talk about a fantastic book called The Rise of the Warrior Cop. It's by Rodney Balco, and I urge everybody to get a copy and read it. Of course, you're welcome to buy a copy and share it around. I have no vested interest in you buying a copy of this book. I don't know Rodney Balco, but I have read the book, and it's absolutely fantastic. It talks particularly about how the police are increasingly like soldiers. They're being increasingly militarized, dressed like soldiers, armed like soldiers, trained like soldiers. They're being pre-screened before they're accepted into police academies. And this started happening in the United States in 1984, between 1984 and 1987. Psychiatrists and psychologists got together and rewrote the manual for acceptance into military academies and for police academies. And what we saw by 1994 was a lot of the veteran police were leaving. And the reason that they gave for leaving was that they felt that the very people that they had initially been arresting, the goons and the militant street people, were now the people that had been accepted into the police departments. So when you start absorbing these kinds of elements into the police department, giving them a badge, giving them a gun, giving them a uniform and sending them out into communities, and then training them in urban environments and telling them that they are fighting a war, a domestic war on terrorism. When you do this, the results are inevitable. You have escalating police violence. You have police brutality towards the civilian population, where they are treating the civilians more like an enemy combatant than citizens with rights. SWAT team raids. Over the last 20 years, there's been a 1,500% increase in the number of SWAT team raids in the United States. Our SWAT teams now look like military teams invading terrorist-occupied villages in far-off lands. The Department of Homeland Security has indeed brought the war on terror to the streets of America. And we, the civilian population, are now the de facto terrorist. Of course, there are 57 different categories that have been identified by the Department of Homeland Affairs as potential terrorists. And if you Google that on your very precious World Wide Web, we will be interested to note that just a regular, law-abiding citizen, minding their own business, living their lives, will qualify under at least 6 or 7 of those headers that identify you as a so-called terrorist in your own country. This is important because our schools are becoming increasingly militant. I want to give a shout out to a 6-year-old boy by the name of Hunter Yelton. He is a student at a Cannon City school in Colorado. He kissed a first grader on the hand and was immediately suspended and then charged with sexual harassment. Now you have to wonder what is going on in our society when we are accusing 6-year-old children of sexual harassment. Now, because of the outcry against this, the school principal and the Cannon School Superintendent, Robin Goody, downgraded his offense from sexual harassment to merely one of misconduct. This is but one. It is the latest, but it is one in an ongoing series of diabolical idiocy that is moving across this country, certainly on steroids, and more into other countries as well.
And we've lost Dinah again. Well, it's a good time for us to take a quick break. Gary, if you can throw on some music, let's get Dinah back and we'll continue this conversation with her and I. Can we do that? I guess, okay.
I'm back.
Okay, Dinah. Well, while we have you, okay, you know, that is the craziest. No, I don't want to say the craziest thing because
it's not the craziest
it's
one, but
cartoonish. It's cartoonish. These headlines that people in positions of respect in our community, a school principal would consider something as innocent and gentlemanly as kissing a woman's hand. I don't care what age you are. I mean, that kid had class just to kiss her on the hand. To call that sexual harassment, that's the Orwellian nature of the society we live in now. They want to warp and twist our thinking so that we don't know right from wrong. Okay? We cannot come to rational conclusions based on the input that we receive because it is irrational in itself. So they're training our children to believe that, you know, kissing somebody on the hand is sexual harassment so that in the future they don't know their sexuality. It is a way to destroy the fabric of a society.
But, you know, it's interesting. This particular case is interesting because someone sent it to me, copied the link off of Facebook yesterday. I had been unaware of it, and someone copied and pasted it for me and wanted a comment, and I saw that, and, you know, my stomach just turned into a knot. So I actually tried to get a hold of Robin Goody, this Cannon School superintendent, yesterday. She was out of the office, and I left a message for her to give me a call because I make it my business to follow up on these calls and speak to these different superintendents and school principals because I keep hoping to be able to hear the sound of insanity in these people's voices, something that will give me something to hold on to, that this is an outlandish person. You know what I mean? But what I overwhelmingly come away with is when you talk to these superintendents, these principals, these teachers, these community leaders, they, in regular conversation, they sound like everyday, normal, regular people. They don't have any overt signs of being diabolically insane. And I keep hoping for it, you know, Matt, because it would be a way to go, okay, well, this is just this insane person, but it's not. There is absolutely this move across this country to victimize and perpetuate this cycle of intimidation that we see in other sectors of our community. You see it in hospitals, how doctors are manipulating and intimidating patients into signing up for treatments. You see it with our police, this escalating violence. I mean, I live in Sonoma County. Just several weeks ago, there was a 14-year-old boy who was shot dead outside in public for carrying a toy gun. And several police officers came up behind him and yelled at him to stop and put the gun down, and he turned around. Well, I would say that he turned around to see who the heck was yelling at him. The way the police read it was he was turning around, he still had his gun up, and he was threatening them. and they shot and killed this 14-year-old.
Well, did you hear about that college kid? I believe it was in Texas, was shot for no more than a wise comment to a trigger-happy cop. Did you hear about that this week?
Yes, and did you hear about the young kid who supposedly shot himself in the back of a police car while handcuffed with his hands behind his body?
No, I had not heard about that one.
Oh,
that's a feat.
That is a feat, and you have 4 police officers looking into the eyes of the camera, going, "There is an investigation. We have no idea what happened." Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? I live in
it shows the corruption. Yeah, and it's just like I think we've talked about it before. The cavity searches that go on now in New Mexico. I mean, they take you and have you get an enema because they think you're hiding drugs up your anus. They do these things, and it's such a wickedly sick society we live in. It boggles my mind that people can operate, and you rightfully point out, they are normal sounding rational people. They just have these really odd beliefs. But if you look at the fabric of our society, where more people vote for the next American Idol than the president, our culture has been compromised. Therefore, I keep repeating this, but I mean it. I put my money where my mouth is. I back United We Strike. And I think we keep talking about these things, teaching people about these topics and letting them, make their own decisions of what to do for themselves and their family. If you don't know that these atrocious things are occurring, like a kid being shot, a college straight A student being shot for no more than a wise comment to a cop. You don't know about that going on in your world because you're too busy watching college football. Then you're more susceptible to living in this fantasy world. It's like the Matrix. I sit outside the Matrix watching it from like a movie, and it's frightening actually to see just how hypnotized people are.
Right, and and it goes back to this whole thing. These are normal-sounding people that just have these outlandish notions. But what has happened over the last several years, I've been involved in school districts for the last 25 years, and I've been raising kids through school systems and through homeschool programs. And certainly in the last several years, there has been an incredible escalation that is so overt and in your face that, to me, the notion that other people are not seeing it, it's one thing for me. Yes, well, I've been raising children through the school systems for 25 years. So when I talk to parents who are first-time parents and they have kids in 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th grade, they say to me, "Yes, but you've been doing this a lot longer, and we don't notice it." And I say, "Well, don't you notice a change from when your kids started school to where your child is now in school?" And they say, "Yes, but those things are to keep our children safe." So they are willing to acknowledge that there's this huge, they can see that there's been an escalation, but they're still drinking the Kool-Aid of this is to keep our children safe. And the sad fact of the matter is that too many people believe that you drop off your child at school in the morning and the school is then responsible for your beautiful, wonderful little child, and Johnny and Mary are going to be completely safe for the duration of their time at school because the school is now acting as parent. But the school is acting as parent not as we parents would act in the best interest of our children. The school is acting as parent, as Big Daddy, and they are carrying an awfully big stick, and attached to that is a punitive document of charges, potential charges against your child. Regular school kids have no rights on the school premises. They are cannon fodder in much the same way as our soldiers are cannon fodder in the military-industrial complex. The only way for you to have any protections for your child is if you have requested and gone through the process of having an individual education plan, which is referred to as an IEP. That particular document affords your child some protection. If your child is a part of the regular student body, they are a victim. They are automatically a victim because they are part of the herd, and they have no rights, no privileges, and are not treated the way that we as parents would think our children would be treated. There is so much victimization that goes on in schools, Matt. Because I work with children that are on the autism spectrum, and the majority of them are very high functioning. They're in mainstream schools. They're not in special education programs. They're in regular classrooms. And so I urge parents, and I walk them through the process of installing an IEP for this very reason, because even when schools know that children are on the autism spectrum and have, for instance, Asperger's, even though a school and a principal and the teachers know this, and they know the particulars about that child and their Asperger's, when something happens on the playground or in the classroom, these children are written up in language that is incredibly punitive in their school records. And what is important to know is that these school records travel with you until you apply for college. And more what we've seen with colleges is that on the local level, property owners pay an enormous percentage of their local property taxes go towards college bonds and supporting their local college. But there is no assurance that your child is going to be granted entry into that college. Several years ago, colleges discovered that it was much more financially rewarding to have out-of-state college students because they could charge them more. That was one of the primary reasons, because of all the budget cuts following the 2008 crash. But what they then discovered is that they could look at all the school records and get incredibly selective about who it was that they accepted. So what you're seeing is, on a local level, is children on the autism spectrum are not being accepted at colleges in their local environment. They're having to move out of their communities and go to colleges in a different state, because when a college takes an out-of-state student and one who has disabilities, such as being on the autism spectrum, they get an increase in federal funds that does not translate into any additional help for the student, but goes directly to the bottom line of the college. So while your child may only be in kindergarten or first or second grade now, if you do not take proactive and preventative action, no matter how smart your child is, when they are done with school, they will not be accepted into college. Isn't that
incredible? That's incredible. Valuable? Yeah, that is, it's more slave training, though. It is to teach our children that they are slaves. Right. They're taught this fear of, we can ruin your life, so you toe the company line, you toe the New World Order line, or you cannot even get an education. And then we're telling our kids, well, you need an education to get a good job. Well, but that's a lie too, because there are no more jobs, at least in the United States. You might want to move to Asia. They've got some pockets of economic boom there, but it's all part of that New World Order design to ruin our society and then ultimately exterminate us all, like so many roaches. Your points are excellent, Dinah. I was going to ask you about the Trans-Pacific Strategic Economic Partnership Agreement. That's the full name of it, but you called it the Trans-Pacific Pact. I would think, like GATT and NAFTA, Congress would have to pass that, no?
Well, and again, no one knows, because no one's been given any information. It's been certainly the most secretive trade agreement in the history of trade agreements, and everything that we have seen thus far indicates that it is absolutely the worst possible form of trade agreement that has ever been attempted.
It's not a trade agreement. It's an international law to control people, and then so the corporations who control governments can increase their profitability. It's all about the bottom line. It's in their charters. They have to, by law, make money if they're, one of those types of companies.
Right. Well, it goes into this, the whole economic growth factor. And if you look at who was involved with writing it, it's all the corporate attorneys representing corporate interests. So who's going to be the ultimate benefactors of this? Well, corporations. And it gives corporations excessive rights over local infrastructure and through local ordinances. And that tells you that increasingly domestically, people are not going to have a voice and not going to have a vote. Because, for example, one of the things that I was reading regarding this is all these countries that currently don't allow genetically modified organisms to come into their country. You have to understand that America is the #1 grower of GMOs. And, for instance, China just refused a 5th shipment of corn from America because it was contaminated with GMOs. Now, what's going to happen once the TPP is in place is that the companies involved with those GMOs, so like Monsanto, DuPont, Syngenta, Dow, all of these big companies that are involved with GMOs are going to be able to sue China in a secret international court. And that's something else that people don't know about. There is an international court system set up where all these GMO lawsuits are being processed in secret. But what is going to happen once the TPP has been rolled out is it's going to be very in your face, and the countries are going to bear the cost for these lawsuits, whereby, let's use China as an example, all of these companies, Monsanto, DuPont, Syngenta, are going to be able to sue China for lost revenue, and they're going to win because of the language of the TPP. Now, China is a country that is not part of the TPP. Japan is the latest to say that they are on board, and that in itself is a red flag because, of course, they've been trying to woo Japan for quite a long time, and Japan has consistently said no. And one of the reasons why Japan said no, well, there's 2 reasons. Is an ongoing dispute with Japan because Japan has a local law which is called the Rice Bowl law, and that says that they have to always keep in their country, apart from the commodities, the global commodities pool, there has to be a guarantee of a bowl of rice for every man, woman, and child in Japan for a year. So there was, for many years, enormous pressure on Japan to abolish that law and put all of their rice into the global commodity pool. And Japan was very resistant. The other thing was there was always a lot of pull and push regarding Japan's auto industry. And many other countries wanted in on the Japanese auto industry. And Japan was very resistant. And then Fukushima happened. And we can talk about the conspiracies to do with Fukushima if you would like to, but the upshot of that has been a distinct lack of interest from the global community. Japan has been ignored. They've been left to their own devices. TEPCO has bumbled their way through one lame fix-it to another lame fix-it. Meantime, the oceans are being destroyed. Now the whole West Coast, China has put a ban on all seafood from the West Coast of the Americas, despite the fact that America continues to say all is well, despite the fact that the global scientific community continues to say that the nuclear isotopes are so watered down and neutralized in our vast oceans that there is no need for concern. But despite all of that, China has gone ahead and said there is now an international ban on all seafood from the West Coast. And
wow. Yeah, that's incredible. Fukushima is actually one of those things that we forget to talk about. It's not on the radar I still try to follow it because it's one of those situations where it could change life on Earth as we know it.
It is the single biggest threat to humanity that no one is talking about, Matt.
Right, and it's continuing. You know, they dump 300,000 tons of contaminated water into the ocean every day, and yes, our fish are becoming radioactive. Yes, our food chain is being destroyed. You know, one would hope that the international community would have jumped in by now, but they haven't, and you have to question why. Why hasn't the world stepped in and offered help? Is because they don't want the help to get there. They want the world, these New World Order people, they want the world destroyed. They want to kill us off. They want the world for themselves so that they, with only a billion or so people, can have the world as their playground. And
well, I think that it's actually more insidious than that. Going back to this Trans-Pacific Pact, because Japan has been so resistant for so long regarding putting its rice on the international commodities market. Also, Japan has been incredibly resistant to any inroads by the pharmaceutical industry. Japan has had traditionally, historically, an incredibly healthy community that has been impervious to the health issues and travails of the Western world. And the primary reason for that is because they've adhered to their traditional diet of a very low intake of red meat, very low intake of cheap food. They've stayed very close to their traditional diets of fermented foods, age-related fermented foods, very small amounts of protein, lots of vegetables, no fried foods, none of the ingredients that are in our Western food chain. And for that reason, they've stayed remarkably healthy. They've also been very resistant to the full plethora of vaccines that the CDC has insisted is their recommended schedule of vaccinations. And so in that way, Japan has really pissed off the greater corporate community that really runs insidiously the world, because it's 147 companies that control more than 80% of the global pool of money, and that is the corporate infrastructure that dictates policy for governments, particularly the United States, particularly once you understand that the United States is not the United States of America and does not have the best interests of the American people at heart, but is in fact United States Incorporated, which is
Correct.
A corporate entity who is beholden to the vast majority of these 147 companies that control the global pool of money. And Japan has been a real thorn in their side, because Japan, of course, has said no thank you to genetically modified foods since the inception of GMOs. They've said no thank you to vaccinations. They've said no thank you to the pharmaceutical industry and their potential inroads into that community. And they also have had a very healthy and very strong automobile industry, and they said no thank you when they were invited to sign the Trans-Pacific Pact years ago. And once Fukushima happened, I firmly believe, from some things that I've heard in the industry, as well as observing from the outside, that the international community was told to stand down. I absolutely believe that. And that as we got closer to a apocalyptic moment, Japan was forced to finally accept and stand up and pick up a pen and say, we will now sign on to the TPP, because in return, of course, they are the next venue for the Olympic Games, and I do believe that that's very conditional. That's conditional upon them actually agreeing and signing this shucky darn piece of paper, and they've opened up the automobile industry. The Philippines and Malaysia and Thailand are going to be building factories that are going to from whence Japanese automobiles are going to be pulled out and sent out into the global market. And so I think that when you look at Fukushima, you have to look at it in the context of these vast corporate political machinations that have been going on for the last several years. And we have to understand that everything that TEPCO has said is an absolute lie. There has been no shoring up of the buildings around Reactor 4. It is absolutely impossible. There is a lot of liquefaction that has gone on around that building. The building is incredibly unstable. It is impossible to shore up that building. It's impossible to remove those rods. And it is absolutely true that all of those nuclear isotopes have made their way into the oceans, have gone all through the ocean's currents. In Hawaii, the corals are dead. For 3,000 miles around Japan, the oceans are dead. We are seeing whales and dolphins in the Gulf of Mexico that have nuclear radiation. Of course, they're also being damaged by core accident and all the things that have happened as a result of the Gulf oil spill. But even as far as South Africa, we're seeing enormous amounts of fish and sea life that is been nuclear contaminated. So this is endemic in our oceans, and we can no longer afford to eat anything that comes from the oceans.
Dinah and Matt, I got to give you the 2-minute warning here and remind you that people are going to be interested in what you've been saying, and they're going to want to know where to go to find more. So don't forget to take time to do a little bit of blatant self-promotion, please.
Blatant self-promotion. I'm a big proponent of Facebook for now. I have several groups up on Facebook. You can find me there. I'm the only Dinah Everett Snyder in the United States on Facebook that I know of. And you can also contact me by email, DinahEverettSnyder@hotmail.com. You can listen to my show every Tuesday afternoon on wideawakenews.com. I come on at 5 o'clock every Tuesday afternoon. And I'm here the second Saturday of every month on the United We Strike Marathon. And don't forget to tune in later to our roundtable.
We look forward to having you on our roundtable, and we appreciate you taking your time to be part of the UnitedWeStrike.com family, because your information is so valuable. You're like an encyclopedia, as Karen says. My website, nwodor.com. You can write to me at matt@nwodor.com. I've got archives up of links from the show we did earlier this morning with Barbara Peterson. My show airs first Saturday of every month on Wolf Spirit Radio. It's called the New World Odor Report, just like it is here. I'd like to thank our production crew, Detlef and Gary, today, who's had to extend their hours of production, and it's not easy at times, and Gary can attest to that. So I appreciate you guys taking the time and helping to keep us up on the air. I look forward to the roundtable. Stick around. We've got Larkin, Texas, Dean Lloyd, Amrosen, Phil Ristino, whole list of Vinny Eastwood coming up on the show. Until next time, folks, take care.